I don't know if you can relate to this, but I have a very complex relationship with nutrition science. Because on the one hand, I feel like I love nutrition science. I've dedicated my life to it, to reporting on it, to reading it, to trying to push the envelope and call for better, greater transparency within the nutrition science endeavor. But on the other hand, I feel like we don't really need any more nutrition science. So much of what we have, as you've said, has been weaponized. It's all such, so much of it, not all of it, but a lot of it is incredibly weak data that's been weaponized to influence public behavior in a way that I would say is not productive and actually can be downright harmful.
Agreed. Yeah. I know I have the same relationship where I love being able to read the science and learn. And I do think that there's a lot of value and importance behind it. But then at the same time, when there's too much dependence on it, that's when it becomes a problem.
Yeah. It's like, do we need another large-scale food frequency questionnaire observational study linking a whole food to some negative disease health outcome when most Americans are under-consuming whole foods, regardless of which whole food it is that we're talking about? It's like that Harvard study that came out recently linking, unprocessed red meat to type 2 diabetes. It's like red meat is not causing type 2 diabetes at the public health scale.
Yes.
I mean, there might be some mechanistic connections. I was actually having this conversation with a friend of mine who's a medical student and PhD named Kevin Bass, who was saying, well, heme, iron, and red meat in vitro, there might be some mechanistic some mechanism that might potentially explain, how when overconsumed and overabsorbed iron might actually, cause insulin resistance at the molecular, cell level. But in the practical sense, like in the real world sense, like most people are not developing type 2 diabetes because they're over-consuming red meat. In fact, red meat consumption has gone down over the prior decades, and incidence of type 2 diabetes has skyrocketed.
Completely. And I think the guidelines would want you to think that it is just about the red meat. That's the reason that even in 1990, like we've had the recommendations for limiting saturated fat to less than 10% of fat consumption since the origin of the guidelines. I actually have the outline of all of the recommendations for every single year.
Wow, so cool.
So yeah, saturated fat has been mentioned in the dietary guidelines since 1980. What changed in 1990 was that the recommendation to eat 6 to 11 servings of bread, cereals, and rice and pasta per day. And it specifically says have several servings of whole grain breads and cereals daily, which means that 6 to 11 of those servings, a few of them might be whole, and then the rest are refined grains that are being included in our dietary guidelines up until the year 2005.
Wow. I mean, it's that whole bottom slab of the food pyramid. Right.
The whole bottom slab of the food pyramid.
Yeah.
So it was funny because I saw some people, and I think maybe even in this article that they were like, oh yeah, these influencers are really angry about the food pyramid and these types of things that they're trying to say are so disastrous. And it's like, but it actually is.
Yeah.
Whether they're an influencer or not, they're calling the truths more so than people that have their masters in public health and people that have their MDs and people that have their RDs that are studying all of this and can't see it for themselves.
And the food pyramid is a perfect example of where we've been so wrong in the past. I mean, it's been retired. Like, we're not using the food pyramid. And correct me if I'm wrong, but like even dietitians, back in the early 2000s, 90s, and 80s and whatnot. I mean, were they actually using the food pyramid as a nutrition heuristic?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Wow, it's crazy.
It's crazy. I mean, they've changed it to My Plate, but the dietary My Plate and the food pyramid are based on the dietary guidelines. The dietary guidelines sets the agenda for everything. Like, that's why it's so important. And that's why there's so many people that are in Washington trying to testify around the time that the dietary guidelines are being released. Like, it sets the agenda for the school lunch and breakfast program, which is billions of dollars. It sets the agenda for women, infants, and children. It sets the agenda for supplemental nutrition assistance program, which over 10 years would be about $1 trillion. It's expected to be in the next 10 years. So it's an enormous amount of money and an enormous amount of power that these companies have and these lobbyists have that, then influence the dietary guidelines, that then influences the food pyramid that has now changed to My Plate.
And My Plate is not much better. Correct me if I'm wrong, but from my vantage point, it looks like it's a more bespoke paradigm where you can actually, you can cater it to your own individual caloric needs, but still, it still implores people to consume up to 10 to 11 servings of grains a day, up to half of which can potentially be refined.
So I believe that it's changed to 6 servings per day.
Interesting.
Up to which half of could be refined, because they recommend 50% whole grain.
50% whole grain, yeah.
Which is atrocious. That's what's causing type 2 diabetes, is refined grains.
Refined grains.
And added sugar that they won't reduce in the dietary guidelines. I mean, it's very clear. And I think that it's important for people to have context that it's like, just because this is how it is today and the fact that it's normalized today doesn't mean that this is how it always will be, which is why it's important, the work that you did going to Senate and to the group that went to Senate, that it's like, we have the power to change. There was a time that doctors and nurses were smoking cigarettes in hospitals and were the actual models for cigarette advertisements. The cigarette industry was actually advertising in the American Journal of, or the Journal of the American Medical Association up until the year 1954. Not just, oh, this doctor smokes Camel or whatever the brand, making health claims like this cigarette speeds up digestion, this cigarette helps to decrease throat irritation, this cigarette helps to decrease colds and asthma.
Wow. Yeah, physicians weren't washing their hands until, I forget his name. Was it Semmelweis or something? Like,
I don't know who it was.
There were doulas were hand washing so as not to spread infection. Well, I don't even know if this is the reason why they were doing it, because I don't know if that was believed to be a thing at the time. But essentially, there was a lot of pushback to the idea that physicians should actually wash their hands.
I know what you're talking about, yes.
Until it was accepted as obviously the right way to proceed with surgical procedures, right?
Right. So I think that we're in this gray area of it, like there not being enough of there's a grassroots momentum that's happening, but it's definitely not happening from the top down, and it will probably take a long time for it to happen, to really like infiltrate fully into the system. Unfortunately, I wish that it was just like an overnight thing, and potentially it could be, but it's very deep.
Yeah.
The money, the pockets, the corruption that exists. And so I'm hopeful that it takes, that it will change. But I think that in the meantime, like this is why I left the nutrition, the public health nutrition sector. And for as much as I felt like it was so important, I was like, the only way that I can really make the biggest impact is by working with people and helping to wake them up to what's happening. And, that's why in the last 10 years, I've worked with so many people to help them take their nutrition and lifestyle interventions to change their trajectory of different diseases and to improve their outcomes, because it's, in my opinion, easier to teach people how to become a health advocate, how to ask your own questions, how to become a free thinker, how to question things like the dietary guidelines or industry or your doctor saying that nutrition has nothing to do with your condition, than it is to go up against the beast that is the food industry and the healthcare system and the pharmaceutical industry.
If you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.